If your wife has ever looked you in the eye and said, maybe we should just get a divorce, this video is for you. If those words hit you like a truck, if you still hear them in your head days later, if you started walking on eggshells, terrified, she'll say it again, stay with me. Because if you mishandle this, you don't just risk your marriage, you risk your children's stability and your own soul. Now, here's what I'm hearing again and again with guys coming to us for help, and also sometimes in your YouTube comments. It goes something like this. Well, my wife threatens divorce every time we argue. I'm trying to lead, but the second I set a boundary, she says things like, maybe we should split, or fine, I'll just divorce you. I'm Catholic. I don't believe in divorce, but I feel completely trapped and manipulated. What am I allowed to do as a husband? Am I supposed to just endure this forever? Well, if that resonates with you, you're not crazy, you're not weak, and you're not alone. Today, we're going to walk through 3 things. What divorce threats actually are morally, and why the church takes them so seriously. How a Catholic husband must respond, firm, calm boundaries without becoming a tyrant. When the situation crosses a line from usual conflict into something that may justify separation, and how to stay in a state of grace the whole way through. At the end, I'll show you a simple script you can use the next time she threatens divorce, so you're not tongue-tied and panicking in the moment. So first up, what divorce threats really are, and why they're not just words. Let's start with the thing most men minimize. She doesn't really mean it. She's just emotional. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes she's flooded, overwhelmed, and those words come out like a pressure valve. But here's what you must see as a Catholic man. Even if she doesn't intend to file tomorrow, repeated divorce threats are an attack on the bond, a weaponization of your vocation, and a grave failure in justice and charity. Classic moral theology is very clear. Marriage is indissoluble in God's plan. Deliberately willing to break that bond or seriously threatening to do so is a grave sin against the fidelity owed in marriage and against the good of the children. It's not the same as a passing, unspoken temptation. It's spoken, aimed, and used to wound. And you need to take that seriously. At the same time, you are not free to fight fire with fire. You may not, as a Catholic husband, use divorce threats yourself. Manipulate her with, maybe I'll leave then, or dangle separation as a way of teaching her a lesson. That would be your own grave sin against the sacrament, against justice, and against the children. We'll talk later about legitimate separation in truly extreme cases, but understand this up front. You are called to be the stable one, the anchor, the man who refuses to turn marriage into a hostage situation, the man who refuses to turn marriage into a hostage situation. If part of you is thinking, yeah, but well, she started it, why can't I mirror her back? That's exactly how 2 frightened sinners turn a sacrament into a war zone. You are not called to mirror her worst moments. You're called to lead her out of them. So the next thing to think about is this idea, I can't lead a woman who refuses to be led. Is that really true? This is a comment I see a lot. Joseph left a version of it on this channel just recently. I cannot lead a woman who refuses to be led. On one level, I get it. It feels true in the moment. But as a Catholic, you cannot stop there. First, we are never required to wait for your wife's permission to lead. If you sit around thinking, I'll lead when she lets me, you have quietly made her the head of the marriage and yourself her follower. That is not what the church teaches. Your authority as husband comes from God through the sacrament, ordered to the good of your wife and children. You don't receive it from her mood or from her approval rating this week. Second, the church does not teach that there are some special category of wives who just can't be led. Every wife receives grace sufficient to live her duties of state, to be a wife, a mother, a helpmeet, to cooperate with her husband's headship, even if imperfectly. So when a man says, I can't lead this woman, a better Catholic question is, where is my leadership weak, confusing, or reactive? So that from her point of view, following me would feel unsafe or unwise. That doesn't mean it's all your fault. She has real sins and responsibilities of her own. But it does mean you don't get to use her disobedience as an excuse for your abdication. Your task is to become the kind of man it's easier for a wife to follow. Clear, calm, consistent, sacrificial. Not perfect, but predictable. Now let's bring in another comment. Dane wrote something very exciting. So what do repeated divorce threats usually mean? Dane wrote something very insightful. He noticed that when he's controlling, rushing, anxious to have everything in his time, he's not trusting God's providence. He's squeezing instead of leading. Often when a wife throws out divorce in arguments, a few things are going on under the surface. She feels unheard. She feels cornered or controlled. She feels hopeless that things will ever change. So divorce becomes the nuclear button. Sometimes it's sinful manipulation. Do what I want or I'll blow up everything. Sometimes it's a cry for help. I don't know how else to make you see how bad this feels. Often it's a messy combination of both. Classical moral theology would say that using threats of divorce as a weapon to coerce, punish, or terrorize is gravely sinful. Persisting in that pattern with full knowledge and consent is a serious disorder against charity, justice, and the good of the children. But a single panicked outburst in extreme emotional distress can reduce personal culpability. The act is still wrong, but the guilt may be lessened. Why does this matter for you? Because your task is not to minimize, oh, she didn't mean it, and also not to catastrophize. She said the D word once, therefore we're finished. Your task is to name the behavior for what it is, refuse to be manipulated by it, and respond in a way that calls both of you back to your vows, to reason, and to grace. If you only remember one line from this video, let it be this: I will never threaten our marriage, and I will not let you throw it around like a weapon either. That's the frame you're aiming for. So how do you respond in the moment without losing your frame? Picture the scene. You're in an argument about money, in-laws, screens, sex, pick your poison. Voices rise. She's overwhelmed. And then, maybe we should just get divorced. Fine. Maybe we're not meant to be together. Everything in you wants to panic, or beg, or blow up and say something equally destructive. Well, here's a better way. First, pause your mouth, not your eyes. Don't fire back. Don't turn away and sulk. Take one slow breath. Keep gentle eye contact. You can even say quietly, okay, that landed hard. Give me a second. That tiny pause stops the spiral. Next, name what just happened. So calmly tell her, when you talk about divorce, that's not a normal argument line. That attacks the foundation of our marriage. I won't throw divorce around, and I don't want you to either. Now, you're not screaming, you're not pleading, you're naming reality as the head of the home. And then, step 3, you reaffirm your vow. You anchor. I took vows before God to stay with you for life. Divorce is not an option for me. Even when we're hurting, I'm not going anywhere. Why is this important? Because, again, classical moral theology is clear. A husband must be faithful to the bond, even when feelings are low, even when the other spouse is failing. You must not respond to sin with sin, threats, cruelty, emotional abandonment. You remain faithful to your state in life. And then step 4, you add the boundary. But because this is serious, if divorce gets thrown around again in anger, I'll pause the conversation. We'll not continue arguing in that state. We can return to the issue when we're both calmer and not using divorce as a weapon. So notice what you've done. You've honored the sacrament. You've refused the manipulation. You've set a consequence without punishing or retaliating. That's masculine leadership. If she calms, you can move on. If she escalates, you follow through. End the conversation. Go to another room or take a short walk to reset. You're not obliged to stand there as a punching bag while grave threats are hurled at you. You are obliged to avoid grave sin yourself, to guard your tongue, and to guard the children from being dragged into the blast zone. So when does this cross over into I might need to separate? So here's a crucial distinction. The church does acknowledge there are situations so gravely harmful that physical separation can be justified, even while the bond remains. Traditional manuals like Callan and McHugh recognize that a spouse is not obliged to remain in an immediate, ongoing, near occasion of serious sin or grave harm. Examples would include ongoing serious violence or credible threats of it, persistent adultery with no repentance, the kind of psychological cruelty that seriously endangers sanity or children's welfare. In such cases, a spouse may seek separation through the proper channels, usually a prudent confessor and, where needed, the bishop or ecclesiastical tribunal. But notice, this is a last resort, not a quick, I'm unhappy, I'm out. The church still calls the separated spouse to fidelity, chastity, and openness to reconciliation. If the other truly repents and amends. Separation is meant to protect virtue and safety, not to facilitate moving on to someone else. So where do divorce threats fit? On their own, they don't instantly justify separation. If her threats become a persistent pattern used to terrorize you, to force you into objectively sinful cooperation, for example, pressuring you to contracept or abandon the practice of the faith, and if every attempt at correction, fraternal charity, counseling, and pastoral help is stubbornly rejected, then you need to be honest with the good priest about whether remaining in that specific living arrangement is becoming a dangerous near occasion of serious sin for you or the children. That's not a decision you make in a rage at 11 p.m. That's a discernment you make on your knees with the confessor in the light of grace. Now here's one other thing the moral manuals are clear about. Your duties of state do not simply vanish because your wife is sinning. You remain bound to provide as far as reasonably possible, to pray for her, to avoid new romantic attachments, to live chastely even if you're separated. You may not weaponize the marriage debt. You may not withhold basic justice or care from her or the children. And you may not drag the children into factions, team dad versus team mum. And crucially, you may never cooperate in her sin just to keep the peace or avoid divorce threats. So if she says, I'll divorce you unless you get a vasectomy, I'll divorce you unless we use contraception, I'll divorce you unless you stop going to mass or pull the kids from catechism, the answer calmly must be, I love you, I'm committed to you, but I cannot offend God to keep you. If you choose to walk away because I obey him, that will break my heart, but I will not follow you into mortal sin. This is where De Malo style clarity helps. Better to endure the temporal evil of abandonment than to choose the eternal evil of apostasy or mortal sin. That is real headship, obedience to God first, then sacrificial love for your wife and children, even at great cost to yourself. If hearing that makes you think that sounds too hard, remember, Christ did not love his bride, the church, by avoiding conflict. He loved her by going to the cross. Your cross will be smaller than his, but it will be real. Now let me give you something you can literally steal and use. Next time she says, maybe we should just divorce, or fine, maybe we're done. You breathe, stay calm, and say, those words are very serious. I'm not going to throw divorce around about our marriage. I made vows before God to stay with you for life, and I'm not planning to go anywhere. But because our vows matter, I'm also not going to keep arguing while divorce is on the table as a weapon. Let's pause this here. When we're calmer, I'm happy to talk about what's really hurting you. But I will not let divorce be used to threaten, punish, or control. Then you follow through. Later, when things are calmer, you can add, if you're feeling that desperate, I want to know. We can talk to a priest. We can get a good Catholic counselor. We can work on this together. But I need you to know I will lead this family towards God, not away from him, even if that means you're angry with me for a while. That is firm, honest, and ordered towards her good. Now, everything we've just covered comes up again and again inside the Patriarchy school community. Men who joined are not saints. They're guys like you, being called controlling, being hit with divorce threats, trying to work out what Catholic leadership actually looks like in 2025. And inside the patriarchy.com community, we've already had husbands report that within a few weeks of applying this teaching, divorce threats stopped, and their wives started saying they felt safer and more secure with them again. And their wives started saying they felt safer and more secure with them again. So if you need men who actually believe in headship, structure, and formation as a Catholic man, and 24/7 support when you're in the thick of an argument or temptation, then head over to patriarchy.com and join Patriarchy School. You'll get courses on headship, conflict, sex, money, fatherhood, spiritual leadership, a community, and access to Nolanbot, our AI coach on WhatsApp. So when she's just dropped the D word in a fight, you're not left guessing alone in the dark. Now, 2 things before you click away. First, in the comments, tell me, without exposing your wife, which part of this hit closest to home for you. Could it be resentment, divorce threats, fear of separation? Your honesty will help other men realize they're not isolated freaks. Second, send this video privately to one Catholic husband you know who's been threatened with divorce. Remember, you're not a boy terrified of being abandoned. You're a Catholic man, a husband, a father, called to love your wife as Christ loves the church, with truth, with mercy, and sacrifice, and without ever turning your vocation into a bargaining chip. Thanks for watching. Head over to patriarchy.com to join us inside Patriarchy School, and I'll see you in the next video.